Living nightmare on the overnight train. This is without a doubt the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. I have only told a few people, but feel like I need to share it here in case it helps any students traveling abroad to be more cautious. So, a little background first. This happened to me about 5 years ago when I was 19 and studying abroad in Italy. Our school had its own campus about an hour outside of Rome in a quiet town where the Pope has a summer place. Part of our school's program in Italy was that we had to leave campus for 10 days to vacation and explore Europe in October. Everyone would split off into their friend groups and travel. I didn't really have a group in which I was attached to, but not wanting to go by myself, I asked these two girls I was friendly with if I could travel with them. They were best friends and roommates and were nice enough and said I could go with them. We decided to travel from Rome to Austria, Prague, and Germany via Eurorail train. We went the entire trip having fun and without incident until the last day, which is where my awful experience begins. On our last day, we were in Munich, meeting up with most of our class as a school tradition of sorts. The two girls I was traveling with and I had tickets to take the overnight train that night back to Rome from Munich, left around midnight. During the day, one of the girls tells me that she changed her plans 10 days ago before we left and was gonna stay in Munich overnight and come back the next day, which was a surprise to me. But I still wasn't that worried because she was joining up with her classmates and staying in a booked hostel with them, and I would still be traveling with this other girl. Then, to my dismay, the other girl says she is changing her mind and is staying overnight in Munich too. I asked her where she planned to stay as we hadn't booked a room in a hostel. She said she would sneak into the hostel and share a bed with the other girl. I told her that I was really uncomfortable traveling alone and that it wasn't fair for her to abandon me like that. She told me nonchalantly that I could just find a hostel and book another ticket if I cared so much. I told her I didn't have the extra money to pay for a separate ticket back to Rome, let alone a hostel in addition to that. Though, despite my pleas, those petty girls said essentially that it was not their problem and ditched me. Luckily, we had already met up with another group of our classmates who felt bad for me and spent the entire last day of our vacation running all around Munich, trying to find me a hostel to stay in that night, and even offered to pool together money to help me pay for a ticket back. Unfortunately, it was Oktoberfest in Germany, and literally every hostel was completely booked up, and despite my attempts to sneak into my friends' hostels with them, I was stopped and thrown out. At this point, it's nighttime. I was defeated and worried, but my other classmates who had tried to help me were still sticking with me. I figured at this point the only option I had was to sleep outside on a bench in Munich, or take the overnight train back to Rome by myself. So I decided to go ahead and take the overnight train back to Rome by myself, and my classmates walked me to the station and saw me on the train. P.S. Those guys ended up being some of my closest friends in years to come. So now, I'm on this overnight train by myself and I head to my carriage. The way it was set up was in a room off of a hallway with 6 seats, no beds because I was trying to save money. I was the first one in my carriage, and so I sit next to the window on one side, and I put my giant backpacker's pack, which was my only luggage, on the 2 seats next to me. Eventually, 2 German guys in their 30s come in and are polite enough and sit opposite me. They converse with each other, they've got their suitcases, etc., and are looking at maps of Rome and tourist things to do. I feel safe enough with these guys since they're minding their own business. This is where it gets bad. I settle in and listen to music and try to sleep for a bit. And perhaps after an hour or so, I start to notice there's a super sketchy guy standing right outside our carriage in the middle of the hallway staring at me. I'm completely freaked out because 1, no one is supposed to just be in the hallway standing there. You're either on your way to the loo or headed back to your carriage. Why would anyone just be standing in the hallway like that? He did not break eye contact with me once I looked at him. He just kept staring at me with a sinister look on his face, like he wanted to eat me up. So, I am kind of freaked out and try to look away and pretend like I didn't really notice him. I wait a bit to see if he was just a normal guy going to or from the loo or something. But when I look back, he's still there, hasn't moved, and is still leering at me from behind the window door of my carriage. I want to go shut the curtains to our carriage so he cannot look in, but I don't want to get too close to him or piss him off or anything like that. So I turn to the two German guys and quietly tell them that the guy there is creeping me out and staring at me and making me uncomfortable. And I asked them if one of them could casually in a minute or so close the curtains. I had hoped they'd be kind men and kind of protect me and tell the guy to bugger off or whatever, but they seemed annoyed at me and mumbled that they would, but never did. When I brought it up again, they kind of acted miffed, but eventually shut the curtain. I thought that surely would have deterred the guy from lurking and soon fell asleep. A few hours later, I awoke the three young Germans in their mid-late 20s join our carriage in the remaining 3 seats. As they come in, I notice that the creepy guy from before is still there standing outside my door. I kind of freak out inside and really don't feel comfortable at all and am a bit panicky. I try to talk to the younger Germans, but they weren't very friendly and perhaps didn't speak English well. It's been hours at this point, and I notice that I really have to pee. But the only way for me to get to the loo is to go outside of the carriage and down the hallway to the loo at the very end of the train, a bit away from other carriages with people. I noticed that when the younger Germans came in, they moved the curtain a bit, so I can see the creepy dude standing out there leering at me still. He refuses to go away. I noticed that when people walk by or use the loo or whatever, he kind of acts casual, like he's waiting for someone or something, and looks away from my carriage, but once they're gone, he's back at it again. I try to hold it in as long as I can, but this is like a 12-hour train ride, and it would be another 4 hours or more before we made it to Rome, and there was no way I was going to make it. At this point, everyone in my carriage has been asleep for a long time, and I don't want to wake anyone. I have to nudge the young Germans on my way out of the carriage to go to the loo, and I try to tell them I'm going to the loo, and could they just keep an eye on me and the creepy lurker, and they brush me off like I'm a jerk for waking them up, and they go back to sleep. I exit the carriage freaked out of my mind, and also about to pee my pants, and of course I basically run into the creepy dude standing outside my carriage. There's hardly any room in the hallway, and he's not giving me any space, and is staring me down. I'm 5'4", he was towering over me at like 6'2" or something. So, I do my best to book it to the loo as fast as I can and lock the door behind me. My heart is racing, and I'm going as fast as I can, so that hopefully he hasn't followed me here. But alas, I get out of the loo, and he is right there, with this disgusting smile on his face. I mean, I don't like to exaggerate, but there was evil in his eyes, and it chilled me. I was sick to my stomach. I tried to squeeze by him quickly, and he just started to press himself against me. I gave him my nastiest face and yelled at him, "Let me go!" and praised tiny baby Jesus. There was a man headed to the loo my way just then, so the creepy dude moved off me, and I booked it back to my carriage, where I proceeded to stay for the remainder of the ride. I had thought that my outburst and little scene I caused would have deterred that sketchy guy from creeping on me anymore. But when I looked up at some point, I noticed he was right back where he was in the hallway, staring at me. At this point, I was kind of in disbelief that someone could be this blatantly obvious, so I started to wonder if there was actually a seat out in the hallway that was a cheaper one than a shared carriage. But then I realized that when I had left to go to the bathroom earlier, I had seen no seats. And I also remembered one unsettling detail too. This guy had no luggage, not even a briefcase. This was a 12-hour plus trip to Germany to Rome, so everyone on this train was either coming or going from a work or pleasure trip. But all of them had at least a small travel suitcase of sorts. So the fact that this guy had no luggage or briefcase or anything on him and was just standing in the hallway staring at me made my stomach drop. This man did not have good intentions, and I could not rationalize it any other way. I spent the last hour or so of the trip devising my plan for once the train arrived in Rome. I knew the train station there very well and knew that the metro train I needed to transfer to get back to my campus was down several flights of stairs and around more than a few twists and turns. I felt pretty confident, so when the train stopped, I had my backpack on ready to go. The other Germans got out of the train ahead of me, and the guy had to move for them to pass, and I quickly followed in between them and jumped off the train and booked it through the station without looking behind me. Thank God it was crowded in a station with people heading to work, etc., so I felt safe, and I was disguised in the crowd. I flew down the flight of stairs and around the turns without stopping at all. When I finally got down to the platform for the local metro train I needed, I felt safe. I was just catching my breath when I saw none other than the creepy guy come down the stairs and look around for me. When he saw me, he had that evil, lecherous look in his eye, and I wanted to cry. I grabbed tightly onto my pocket knife in my coat pocket and made my way to a group of harmless-looking Italians and tried to stand in their group. They seemed annoyed that I was standing so close to them. I was standing still about several train car lengths away from him at this point, and he was just starting to make his way over to me just as the train pulled up. I hopped on my car immediately and tried to position myself near some folks. I noticed he got in a few cars away. As the car was moving, he made his way down his car into the next, and with each stop the train made, he got a little closer to me. I, myself, moved a few cars down away from him, but I grew increasingly worried that the farther outside of the Metro Rome area, the fewer people were on the train and the closer he was getting to me. When I made it to the first car and realized I had nowhere else to go, I looked and noticed he was only one car away from me and headed my way. As we pulled into the next stop, I grasped my pocket knife tightly and made a last-ditch effort to evade him and get off the train. I looked to my right and to my horror, saw that he had gotten off as well and was briskly running towards me. As the last few people shoved past me to get on the train, I realized I had no other options left and threw myself back and dove into the train without breaking eye contact with the psycho as the doors to the train closed in front of him. And I realized I made it safely onto the train, leaving him on the platform fuming and yelling as the train sped off. Not really believing I had made it safely, I spent the rest of the metro ride still in fight or flight mode and dashed upstairs to my above-ground bus up to my campus, making sure I was sitting next to a sweet old lady. The creepy dude never showed up on the bus, and once I made it back inside my campus walls, I immediately fell to the ground and sobbed. I realized that I was so incredibly lucky that I evaded what was probably certainly kidnapping, rape, murder, even who knows. But I've never forgotten that man's face and the look in his eyes, and how it made me feel like I wanted to peel my skin off and crawl under a rock and die. I ended up telling my ordeal to the dean of our campus and pleaded for him to reprimand those two girls who abandoned me and forced me into a compromising position which was completely unsafe. I wanted the dean to tell all the students and future students that it's never okay to let someone travel alone, especially females, and especially since most of us were young and felt invincible and were just plain naive and stupid and didn't know what was safe and what wasn't. But that weasel of a dean thought I was overreacting and I was probably asking for it, and thought the girls who abandoned me were goody-goodies and I was some loose rebel who got herself into this whole situation. He never addressed it, that's SOB. I haven't heard of anyone else at my school getting into situations like me, but I made sure to tell all the girls and guys who were in years below me to be careful when they study abroad and not to do what those girls did to me. I hope this helps someone in some way. And if you ever see a man traveling a long distance without any luggage or briefcase at all, be wary. Do you have any room? Pretty new to Reddit in general, and English is not my first language, so please be understanding. I got hooked on this subreddit right away, so I figured I should contribute with sharing my own experience. This happened to me about 6 to 7 years ago. I'm a female, 175 centimeters, 60 kg. I think I was 17. So, it was the beginning of the summer and I was traveling to my summer home, like I did every summer. I live in a small southeastern European country, and this is pretty normal for most people here. I would usually travel by train overnight because I would get to sleep most of the trip. The train took about 8 hours. It didn't cross a great distance, but it was just really slow. Anyways, I have done the same trip alone a couple times already and never had a problem. Also, my country is pretty safe, so taking this trip on my own was never really a concern for me or my parents. The train left at 11 p.m. and was scheduled to arrive at 7 in the morning, meaning I had 7 to 8 hours of sleep, which was great. At first, I was alone in the compartment, but after I got settled, a girl about my age asked me if she could join me in my compartment, and I said yes. We started talking a bit, the usual, where are you from, how old, what do you do? Even though I was comfortable traveling alone and was bigger than her and a year older, I was happy she was there. We talked until midnight, and then decided to try and get some sleep. Since the train was pretty empty, and it was just the two of us in our compartment, we could both lie down. I just started dozing off when I heard our compartment door opening. There was a man standing at the door. He looked at us for a second and then asked, "Do you have any room for me?" Now, what was weird about this was that first of all, the train was pretty empty, so I was certain there were other completely empty compartments. Secondly, he saw us both lying down, taking up all the space, so there was really no need to ask. And finally, it was the way he phrased it. Do we have any room for him? In the moment he asked this, I was still not sleeping. I squirmed a little bit and started to answer, but he left the second I started squirming. I remember him closing the door as I was about to answer, and I thought it was weird, but whatever, right? My sleepy brain didn't want to bother, so I forgot about it instantly. I think the girl and I exchanged a what the fuck look, and that was it. However, not more than 5 minutes passed and he was back. Again the same. He opened the door and asked us if we had any room for him. I was a stupid, scared kid back then, so I just stayed silent and pretended to sleep. Luckily, the girl was smarter than me, even though she looked timid, and she just sort of yelled at him, "No, you can't, there is no room, we're trying to sleep." He just closed the door and laughed. I kind of chuckled, probably my nerves. She smiled at me and that was it. I somehow managed to fall asleep again. Although it was very light sleep, I kept waking up throughout the night, probably for the better, right? The girl and I went our separate ways in the morning, as we were both traveling further. I didn't have Facebook back then, so I didn't stay in contact with her, and I forgot her name over the years. Although, for some reason now that I'm writing this, Ivana rings a bell. I will, however, be forever grateful for her for possibly saving me that night, and that you can always stand up for yourself even if you are a small, fragile-looking girl. We didn't get a good look at the guy because it was dark, but my impression back then was he was between 30 and 40, so had no business to hang out with us, and if he wanted to sleep, he had plenty of empty compartments. That is why I think he had something else in mind. I was so happy the girl was there because I have no idea what I would have done on my own. I like to think I would have stood up for myself, but I honestly don't know. Stuck overnight. Disclaimer: This happened 2 years ago while I was studying abroad in France. I was 19 years old. I'm usually a very cautious person, but ended up being pretty dumb abroad. I was supposed to fly back to France after spending break with a friend in Rome, but it turned out at the airport that I accidentally bought a flight for the right airline in time, but the following day. My friend got on the flight, and I probably just should have spent the next 24 hours in the airport. But at that moment, I was just completely done with traveling and beyond determined that no matter what, I was making it to my class the next day. I wandered around the airport and determined that any last-minute flights for that day would be too expensive, and decided to fuck that. The airport had internet, and I saw that I could take a train to Milan, then another to Geneva, spend the night there, and then take an early morning train back with plenty of time before class. I messaged my friend online, told her I was getting back the next day and not to worry. As a side note, I had a basic flip phone abroad that did not have internet. I could text and make calls freely in France, but had to buy special prepaid cards for outside of France. Unfortunately, I ran out of money on my card earlier in the trip and could not find other prepaid cards that worked. I was pretty much on my own. So, I rushed to the train station and caught the train at the last minute, and everything was fine until I got to Geneva a bit before midnight. At that point, the station was pretty quiet. Every so often, a train would still arrive, but people would clear out pretty quickly. No red flags from the start, but as I said earlier, I'm a pretty cautious person, so I was on alert. The first unsettling person at the train station was this completely hammered, beyond wasted guy who would follow me from room to room. I mean, he never looked directly at me, but seconds after I entered a room, he would be in the same room just stumbling around but never making eye contact. I think eventually he lost interest and left, but it began to set me on edge. Then, after a while, 2 officers in the train station told me that they were closing up the main station, and if I wanted to stay, I had to go to the shady shopping area downstairs. A description of the place. It was cold, as in freezing. The floor was concrete and disgusting, with puddles of what I hoped was water, and it was open. Anyone could come in. About half an hour after I sat down, using a towel for a blanket and shivering, he arrived. He was significantly taller than me. I'm 5'4", and relatively muscular, wearing a t-shirt with no coat despite it being freezing outside, and he was drunk. He smiled and sat down next to me, and suddenly I was very much aware of how alone I was. He offered me a beer, which I politely declined, and he drank instead. He asked me where I was from, and seemed satisfied when I said I was from the United States, telling me that the US was good, unlike most of Europe, because it was a God-fearing country. Then he got angry, yelling gibberish about how the world was doomed because of black people. He was black himself, Indian people, and Asians because they did not follow God and were going to be doomed in hell, and anyone who did not follow God deserved to be destroyed. Around now, I became worried that if it came down to him testing my knowledge of the Bible, it would become clear pretty fast that I am not a Christian, and it was also obvious that he would not react very well to that. I just wanted him to leave, but he just got worse. I tried to nod and agree with everything he said, but he just kept yelling. "You know, Joseph fucked Mary, right?" He told me. "What?" I asked. "Joseph fucked Mary," he said again, even louder. At this point, I was digging my nails into my fists, getting ready to defend myself if he got violent. Luckily for me, around now, 2 officers showed up and asked me if he was bothering me. I did not want to anger him, so I told them no, that I was fine. But they clearly saw that I was upset and told him to leave. He got up and walked away, but the entire walk away, he let out this hysterical laugh that bounced around the basement. Honestly, under some circumstances, it might have sounded comical. It was high-pitched and sounded a lot like a dolphin. But sitting there alone, knowing that nothing would stop him from coming back, it really chilled me. For the next 5 hours, until the train station opened, I was on high alert, constantly imagining that ridiculous laugh coming back for me. So, delusional, Bible-preaching, dolphin-calling racist, let's not meet again.